Okay, welcome everybody. This is my discussion with author Linda McGurk. This is the second time I'm having a chance to speak with her. About a year ago, we talked about her first very popular book, There's No Such Thing as Bad Weather. And today we are going to be talking about her newly released book on a similar theme that I think is actually quite a nice compliment, I would argue, The Open Air Life, Discover the Nordic Art of Friluftsliv and Embrace Nature Every Day. Apologize for my Swedish pronunciation there. Linda, I'm really excited to be speaking about this book. I'm also excited to talk to you because it's so fresh on the shelf. I mean, as a mother of four little kids living in Denmark, this is very much part of our culture here. But I think, in the current state of the world, we can all use reminders of why this lifestyle is so important. And I'm looking forward to talking to you today and learning a little bit about what secrets you've tucked into this book for us. So can we dive into the questions, or was there anything else you'd like to say about the book before we get started?
Well, I just want to say thanks for having me again. It's been, we had a lot of fun last time, and yeah, looking forward to chatting.
So if we dive right in, perhaps there are people who don't know this Swedish-Norwegian term, Friluftsliv. Could you talk a little bit about what that is? And you mentioned in your book 3 forms of it. So maybe just take it from the top.
Yeah, so it's funny. It's the first time I've heard it pronounced with like a Danish pronunciation.
Yeah, Friluftsliv.
Yeah, most people really struggle with it. I suppose it's a little bit like hygge. I don't know. Am I saying that right?
Hygge.
Hygge, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a Danish concept that sort of became a craze in the US a few years ago. And to explain Friluftsliv like really simply, I tend to call it the outdoorsy cousin of hygge. It's sort of what we do outside before we come inside and cozy up in front of the fireplace with our wool socks on and that. So it's essentially about spending time outside in your nearby nature for personal wellness and to experience nature without any pressure to compete or achieve anything. And just a way to connect with Mother Nature and connect with the land, and also connect with your family and ancestors too. So yeah, I talk about 3 different forms of Friluftsliv in the book, and it's just to make it a little more tangible and to break it down a little bit to where where you can apply it to everyday life. And so the first one is like everyday Friluftsliv, which is the little simple things that you can do on an everyday basis. So basically utilizing all the green spaces that are close to you. If it's just getting outside to play in your backyard, if you have a backyard after school, that could be a form of everyday Friluftsliv. Or maybe just going for a walk to a neighborhood park or something like that, or walking the kids to school. Anything that's accessible to you every day. And then there's weekend Friluftsliv, which is the things that take a little more preparation and time, and maybe things that you would do for like a longer span of time. So for example, maybe doing an outdoor cookout, going to a park a little farther away, maybe exploring at like a state park or something like that. And then I also talk about vacation Friluftsliv, which might be a trip that you go on just once or twice per year. And when you stay out a little longer and you find like places that are a little wilder, so more remote, think camping, things of that nature. So that's just to sort of break it down and to get people to understand that there are different levels of Friluftsliv, and they're all helpful and good for your health. It's just wilder places are more restorative in terms of mental health and so forth. But the everyday Friluftsliv that you can do, even if it's just getting outside for a 20-minute walk, is really beneficial as well. So they complement each other very well, and together they sort of make up a whole lifestyle.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way of thinking about it. And even as you were speaking, I was thinking about when my kids were really little. I mean, they're still pretty little, but there would be days where I would be going to get the mail, as an example. This is, let's just see the very, very low level, but I would make it an excuse to walk around the yard and just like be putting toys away and spending a time sort of admiring what's changing in my yard. And that isn't, I mean, that is not something planned in my schedule, but I would use that as an opportunity to just be out of my house and away from my responsibilities for maybe 10 minutes.
Yeah, it could be really simple things. I remember when my kids were younger, what I would often do in the wintertime when I knew there would be some resistance to going outside, we would stop by the park on our way home from school. So the kids were already, they already had their outdoor gear on, and it was like on the way home. So it became sort of, we did it in the transition period. And that usually worked out really well, because it turned out once we were at the park, they really enjoyed it, and we didn't have that sort of obstacle of having to get dressed all over again. So it's just about finding those little those opportunities to get outside on a regular basis.
And this may be a somewhat obvious question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Who can benefit from this, or benefit the most from it? Is it something we do alone, or we should aim to do in a group? Tell me about who it's for.
Yeah, I think it's, well, also obvious answer. Of course, I think it's for everybody.
Yeah.
But I will say this, for people who work inside and are pretty sedentary, I would say they would definitely benefit more, probably than others, and also children, of course. So that they get this sort of connection with nature from an early age, because it's really about creating lifelong habits. And the best way of doing that is start them early, start them when they're babies, get outside there. You may not think that they remember, but it'll still be, their brains are still developing, and they are still taking in all the nature sounds and just everything from being outdoors. So they can still, it will all create new pathways, neural pathways in their brains. And so definitely for kids especially, and people who maybe like me, who spend most of their days in front of a computer screen, we definitely need that break to get outside and to get that daylight and just unplug. So for me, it's definitely a lifeline. It's my most important type of self-care, hands down. It helps me on a daily basis, and that's why I'm so passionate about it and trying to spread the message to others.
Yeah, the book, I'm still waiting for my physical copy, but I've had a deep look into the digital one, and it's a really nice blend of theory, or like learning from what science has shown us about how important this is, but also talking about very specific human experiences. Also, you talk about 5 theories about our human need for green in the book, and we don't have to go all through them, but which one speaks to you most personally?
I think first I want to say, I think I would say they're not like competing theories. I think they overlap. And the reason why there are several theories is because, I mean, even though we know the research has shown that nature is beneficial, where opinions sort of where there are several theories is about the reasons why. So why is nature beneficial? And I think one of the most powerful theories here is probably the biophilia theory hypothesis, which talks about, a lot about like our evolutionary heritage and how we're automatically drawn to nature because that's the environment in which we have evolved. And when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. The way we live our lives today has not been the norm historically, and yet our bodies are essentially the same as they were when we still lived in caves. So there's a lot to that. I think that a lot of this is actually biological, that we have a biological need for green space and blue space because that is, historically that's what we associate with the resources that we need for our survival. Green, obviously plants that we can eat, and blue is water, and which is absolutely essential to our survival. And so I think that one is really sort of powerful, but also like attention restoration theory, where which talks a lot about the difference between directed attention, which is the type of attention that we need to solve complex problems. So it's a form of attention that we use a lot at work, for example. If we're solving math problems or just working you're sitting with a spreadsheet and trying to like I said, solve problems, or navigating busy traffic, for example, is another situation that requires a lot of focus. Whereas in nature, nature can trigger more of a soft fascination. So there's still a lot of things that pique our curiosity and might want our attention, but it's a sort of effortless attention, which is different from the directed attention. So with the effortless attention, that's restorative. So I think those two are kind of the leading theories, and then there are some others as well, but definitely interesting. And I think it's sort of a combination of all, really.
Yeah, it's been really exciting for me in the last year. I've been, investigating a lot of topics related to how children are learning and developing and how important nature is for that. And I think this indirect stimulation has such a big, it's very clearly shown how it impacts the way that they learn and develop. And maybe that's easier to see in children who year on year are progressing and changing so quickly. But I think, why would the principles be any different for us as adults, the way we are influenced or stimulated in a positive way?
Right.
And I think, that's why I think a lot of the work that you discuss in here is so interesting to think about as we design lifestyles that either nurture us or perhaps are, maybe, I don't want to say damaging, but not as optimal for our well-being.
Well, I mean, it is true that the environments that we have built, a lot of the built environments today are in fact detrimental to our health. The way we build cities today, and that's why city planning is so crucial to to promote open air life or Friluftsliv. It's really crucial to have those urban green spaces. So, and I think a lot of that is starting to change. I think city planners are starting to understand more and more, because I think people crave it. People don't want to live their lives just surrounded by concrete. It goes against our nature.
Yeah. Were there any, I mean, you have me thinking of a lot of the stories that I read in your book, and, were there any, I think you tried to weave in some of these different perspectives of how the open air lifestyle has either changed a person's experience in life or their well-being. There were some people, I think, that like solved health issues through the book. Were there any memorable human stories that really stick with you after writing the book?
Yeah, there was one interview that really moved me, and it's the story of this woman who comes to Sweden with her son from Iraq. They flee Iraq during the Gulf War, and so she comes to Sweden and has this sort of experiences this sort of culture clash where she has no real history with being out in nature is not something that they do in Iraq. And then she befriends a Swedish woman and who introduces her to the Swedish forest. And it's kind of funny how she dressed up to go outside. Like she dressed up in her nicest clothes to go to the woods, and her Swedish friend shows up wearing these rain boots and raincoat, and there's like this funny clash between cultures where to the Iraqi woman it was a cause of dressing up, and the Swedish woman is all practical, like gotta dress for the weather. And but then as she gets used to being out there, she really takes the Friluftsliv lifestyle to heart, and she starts going to the forest with her son. And unfortunately, her son develops a form of cancer because of the chemicals that they were exposed to in Iraq. And he passes away, but Yusrat is her name. She keeps going back to the forest because that's where she has these precious memories with her son, and how she felt like in the forest he could breathe more easily. And I was so, like, she moved me to tears when I did the interview, and that story really stuck with me afterwards. I couldn't quite let it go. It was so powerful. And I know a lot of people do seek comfort in nature. I think it's one of the most common coping techniques for people who are grieving here in Sweden. And also people who receive like a cancer diagnosis. That is our way of processing, really hard news. And it's just, it sort of has that effect on you. And we saw it during the pandemic too, that people really took to the woods even more than normal. And I think it's just the way that we handle crisis here. It's like we you go outside and everything immediately feels a little lighter, as if you're not carrying the entire burden of the world on your shoulders. It lifts you up somehow.
There's, I mean, that story is so beautiful. I think it really on a lot of levels represents the power that the outdoor environments can have on our well-being. I've got a poem by Wendell Berry hanging in my house, and it's called The Peace of Wild Things. And this is what I was thinking of. This is what when you're speaking of that story, it made me think of it, because I mean the feel of that, it's a beautiful thing, and I recommend everyone read that also. But
it's one of my favorite poems. I love it.
Yeah, and it's about, when the world is too heavy, I find myself going and he lists some really beautiful specific places that he goes to find the peace of wild things, who don't worry about a lot of the things we take on as humans in our modern lifestyle. And I think for me anyways, that's often what I find is sort of, as you say, it's comforting somehow, and also puts you in the greater perspective in another way.
Yeah, for sure.
You do talk about the pandemic actually early in the book, and a few ways that Scandinavians were especially creative or innovative, to not like one way going to the forest, but I think you gave some really specific examples of how they problem solved or created new ways to use nature as a tool for solving some of the issues that were arising. Could you tell us a few of those if you remember them?
Yeah, for sure. So in Iceland, for example, when the social distancing measures were implemented, the National Forest Service there, they encouraged people to come out and hug a tree instead in one of the national parks, which I thought was a really cute campaign, and it even made like international headlines. And in Sweden, there were some people who developed an app to connect like random strangers during the pandemic who were working from home and, in need of company for walks. Of course, like safely distanced and only 2 people at a time. I feel like you always have to add that disclaimer because it sounds like what?
Yeah.
It's like connecting random strangers in a pandemic. But I think in many ways we adapted maybe more easily here because we were already used to doing a lot of things outside. So when the pandemic hit, we naturally sort of fell into just doing even more of what we were already doing outside. So, but I know a lot of people did in other places too. But fortunately, in the Nordic countries, we didn't see the shutdowns of parks and beaches and like outdoor venues that we saw in a lot of other countries. And I know in some places, my dad lives in Portugal, and there were times when they could barely leave. I mean, they were barely allowed to leave their house. Unfortunately, when they live in a house, so they at least could be in their backyard. But for people living in apartments, it was really, really hard on people's mental health. And I've been quoting this study, but I've seen a study coming out now after the pandemic showing that people who were subjected to these like really restricted lockdowns, they are 50% more likely to suffer mental health issues afterwards. So it just goes to show what happens to us when we are completely shut off from our natural environment. So yeah, those were just a few ways that we dealt with it. I celebrated several of the holidays outside. I met up with my friends for a hike, like a New Year's Eve hike and a cold plunge, grilling hot dogs in the woods. And my friend, even one of my best friends, actually told me, she said, well, so yeah, Christmas was all outdoors. We spent, 3 days in the woods grilling hot dogs, but in a way I kind of liked it because it made it really easy.
Yeah, no cleanup.
Didn't have to prepare much food, didn't have to, deep clean my house and get it all ready for guests. And so, yeah, of course, that got old after a while too, but right there and then, we just kind of coped with it. So
yeah, and I mean, I don't think this is really the point of the book, but it certainly refocuses in those moments, it's not that you miss being able to go to the mall or something, like where you realize you miss the people. And so I think that maybe has hyper focused us on what the priorities were.
Yeah.
There was another, I'm going to just jump. I have questions in an order, but there's one other app you mentioned, and I'd like to talk a little about why we need quiet places. So one of the gentlemen you mentioned, Peter Lund, is that right?
Yes.
Peter Lund, he created something pretty interesting. So yeah, that's 2 questions. Why are quiet places important? And then what has he created?
Yeah, so noise can actually be pretty harmful to our health. I mean, we get used to noise, but it still affects our bodies in ways that aren't always good for us. It creates like an underlying stresses our systems. And so, of course, most of us live in cities today. So there's always going to be noise in the cities. And what actually, I think several places in Sweden by now, he was one of the pioneers, Peter Lund. But what they did was they tried to find some quiet places in some urban green spaces, green spaces that were at least like close to the city. And so he went out with one of these, I can't remember what they're called now. It's like a tool that you measure, the decibel level with, and to find like the quietest spots in and around the city. And then they mapped it out on a map and put it all into an app, and then shared it with people. So it's like a free app that you can download to find the quietest spots in the city. And I thought that was pretty neat. And also, he also points out that it's not just about the places being quiet, it's also about the presence of nature sounds. So it's not that they're completely silent, but it's that that people can hear, like birds singing, and like creeks, water flowing through creeks, and leaves rustling in the wind, and things like that. And people could also they ask people to share. They put out surveys and things like that, so people could have an input on what they were experiencing, in each of these spots. And it turned out to be a really nice app, actually. And I think it's been replicated, like I said, in several places. And I think that is important. That's, once again, city planning comes into that too. How do we create, quiet places, or places with more nature sounds in an urban environment? That's definitely a challenge for city planners to sink their teeth into, I think.
Here in Denmark, there's maybe half of that is solved in a sort of, or approached at least in a crude way. So when you're buying a house, you can actually see what the noise pollution is for
Oh,
the
wow.
property. So, and I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, it's been a few years, but you can also look at the time of day. So for example, I'm in the countryside, but there is like it's not a country road, but like there is I'm trying to think of the word now. It's a paved road that people would use to commute between two towns where people would work in. So I could check what is the noise pollution at peak commuting times.
Wow.
And so that was, we looked into that because of the peace and quiet we wanted in our yard, to be sure that that road up at the top of the hill doesn't affect us. And fortunately, perhaps it's the wisdom of the people who built this old house I'm in. It's like sort of tucked into a hill, and the nature around our house also absorbs whatever noise there would be. And I think, maybe that is some of this ancient wisdom, or not ancient, but wisdom, the wisdom of arc of design that can be built into our lives, and that we can be more intentional about as we pick where we spend our time.
Definitely. Hills and trees and other vegetation can definitely help absorb and dampen the sound from man-made objects like cars and factories and things like that. So definitely.
Here in Denmark, they do it a lot, where they'll build these big, like, rather than a fence. I feel like in North America, I would often see a fence, or like something that's meant to create a sound barrier. But here in Denmark, you get these big, like, artificial hills that are built. A lot, if there's a residential area, they'll build this between the main road and even a subdivision. And I think it's a nice way of ensuring that there's peace and quiet where people want to live and be spending their private time.
Right.
You've answered this a little bit, but if there's anything to add about how you feel the open air lifestyle affects mental health and stress, I think we've talked about it a little bit. But was there anything else you wanted to add on that point?
Really, that it affects us both physically and mentally. Cortisol levels go down when we go outside, which that reduces stress, for example. Heart rate goes down, and we just feel relaxed. It helps us focus, and this is pretty universal. I think the biophilia comes in there, really. We have this natural response, and this is all measurable. It's no like hocus pocus. Like this is for real. So and it can be what really strikes me as is astounding, that it's not pushed more, but maybe it's because there's no money to be made off of it. But there are studies showing that just being outside in nature can be more beneficial when you suffer from anxiety and stress and even depression. Then it can be more effective than pharmaceuticals, and it has no side effects. So it's to me, it's strange that we're not talking more about it. I mean, I know it's the past decade, you know, there's been a lot of progress, and we're seeing more about it, more studies and all that, and that's all great. It's just to me, it seems like it would be the first step, like whenever somebody starts suffering from mental health issues, that should be like the go-to treatment, like the first step. And then, you know, if that doesn't help, yeah, then you might look at other options. But really, since it has no side effects, then I think I don't know why it isn't used more. But we're seeing doctors starting to prescribe nature as prescription, not just for mental health issues, but also for like obesity and you know, to prevent heart disease and things like that. So there are all sorts of benefits, really.
The one
Yeah.
other, I'll just interrupt you, that you add in your book is about sleep. And I don't know that people always think of that. They think, as you said, cortisol levels, I feel better immediately, but actually
Yeah.
there's some impact of being outdoors on sleep, right?
Yes, because the sunlight, daylight, actually helps regulate hormones in our bodies. And yeah, I think it's something most people don't think about. And that's what we called our circadian rhythms. And I wasn't even aware of that really until I started researching my book. But they impact basically, it's a sort of biological clock that is ingrained in every cell of our body, essentially. And when we spend all our time inside four walls, we don't get that natural daylight. We're just subjected to all this artificial light, including, you know, blue light from computers and other electronic devices. And that sort of disrupts our sense of awakeness and tiredness. So it sort of disrupts our natural cycles. So when you go outside, what happens is that it sort of resets that sort of natural cycle, that the alertness and sleepiness cycle. So that's why camping, for example, is so good for you, because if you're out camping for a few days, you actually sort of reset that whole cycle. And there are a lot of people who suffer from sleeping disorders today, have trouble sleeping, you know, insomnia, or who wake up at night, or, you know, sleep too much, and all that. You know, of course, it's not maybe practical to go camping every weekend, but if you can at least do it every once in a while, that will help. That will give you a boost that will actually last for some time. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that one's really powerful. And as you say, I know maybe it's difficult to measure that benefit, but I certainly am more productive in my job when I'm sleeping well, or when I feel like I'm alert in the mornings. It gets a little tricky in Scandinavia because it's so dark in the morning.
Yeah.
That is a little bit tricky, but I do
Yeah.
find that if I'm outside at lunchtime, even that like
Yeah.
dose of sunlight can help
Yeah.
orient. Hopefully it's my circadian rhythm.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because we're so far north here, I think around lunchtime is probably the best time, because that's when we have the strongest daylight here. So that's usually when I try to go. I try to do that every day.
Yeah. And you know, you talk about the merit of just walking. So I think maybe if people would pick up your book, they would think, okay, this means I have to dramatically overhaul my life. But talk a little bit about the importance and value of just walking. And you actually mentioned different ways of walking, which was pretty unique to me.
Yeah. Yeah, so just walking is just such a health boost. Like I mentioned heart disease earlier, it can reduce your risk of obesity. I mean, osteoporosis, like, because the daylight helps, you know, vitamin D production. And like diabetes, like all the major lifestyle diseases that we have today that sort of are the main causes of mortality today. Walking can impact essentially all of those. and also anxiety and depression that I mentioned earlier, and even several types of cancer, and all like and all what do you call it, all-time mortality, or like overall mortality. So it's a really powerful tool. And it's not like you have to walk for hours every day either. Even just like a half-hour walk per day can have it can make a huge difference to your physical and mental health. So it's not a matter of, completely overhauling your life and like going on or running marathons or anything. It's just about trying to get walking into your sort of everyday rhythm, and just make a habit of it. And I think language is sort of a reflection of the culture. And I think in the Swedish language, and I don't know about Danish, but maybe you have a lot of words for walking as well. But here it's like we have a word for every different little type of walk. Because I felt like in the US, we often talk about like hiking. But to me, that's more like, okay, that's when there's a destination. To me, it implies like a longer walk with a destination, probably something that you have to pack for and have like maybe specific equipment or gear and clothing. And I think in the open air lifestyle, or Friluftsliv lifestyle, like 90% of the time, you may just be walking around your neighborhood, which doesn't really require a lot of gear at all, as long as you can stay warm and comfortable. And so there's like the morning walk, there's the evening walk, there's the lunch walk, there's the beach walk, there's the forest walk. There are just like, there's like a word for every thinkable way of walking, which I think is kind of it's kind of neat.
I don't remember if there was a specific walk name for it, but you also mentioned that even, business and work environments can utilize walking.
Yes, walk and talk meetings is really big here in Sweden, and that's when a company decides to do some of their like business meetings outside, and they're often used for sort of more informal meetings or like creative brainstorming sessions, or if you need to do like feedback with a single employee, and an outdoor sort of informal setting might just make it a little easier for people to open up. Or that's like one of the benefits that the people have discovered about it, that it's sort of, when you're walking side by side with somebody, it kind of puts people more on a level playing field, like regardless of what your title is. And so, what some of the executives have said to me that I've interviewed is that it seems like being outside in the open air makes people a little more comfortable to share information that they may not feel comfortable sharing when they're sitting across the table from you. So yeah, those are definitely getting popular. And I think, like we know with kids, they learn better when they're moving, while you're also if you're like talking about something and they're moving at the same time, they absorb more of the information. And the same goes for adults. Like we actually retain information better if we are also moving. So from that perspective, it makes perfect sense as well, really.
Yeah, I think if anyone who runs some kind of business or has some management responsibilities, one of my favorite things at my office is by the coffee machine, they put up a map with the like the mileage, or like how long. Here's a little loop around. I'm at a university, so here's a loop around this part of campus, or if you go out to this road, and perfect for a 20-minute meeting, or a lot like a 45 minutes. So they actually make it really easy to say, let's take track 1. We'll do a 20-minute walking meeting. And I think like what a great and practical way to implement to support a healthy work environment and a happier employee base.
Yes. Yeah, it's really a win-win.
So I think, so I know I'm conscious of time, but how would you describe that readers can use your book? I mean, there's stories in it. There are like scientific references so people can understand the merit to these points. But there's also, I think, some practical things you've included that I'd like you to mention.
Yeah, it's sort of simultaneously, I think, meant to be inspiring, but also a little bit of a practical guidebook. So, so there are definitely some educational portions in there, good to know stuff if you're just getting started, things to consider, you know, what you might need, what kind of gear to do, like backpacking, for example, different ways of building a fire. And I've also included some recipes. I wanted the book to be sort of an easy read, but at the same time have some inspirational stories in it as well, and some of my personal stories too, because so many people read my first book, and I figured they will want to hear a little more about, like, okay, so what happened next? You know, what happened after the first book. So.
And your girls are a bit bigger now, right? So that's also, you get the opportunity to approach it from a different age group, which is.
Yes, and I have 2 bonus daughters now, so we have the whole age span from 5 to 14, which makes it pretty interesting.
You really are an expert.
Yeah. So that's one of the reasons, and I write about this in the book too, but I've found that, like, cooking outdoors, that's become like one of our go-to Friluftsliv activities that we like to do as a family, because it's something like everybody likes food, right? And so it's something that we can all, you know, we can all gather around the fire, and that makes for a pretty good starting point, at least for everybody. So I can definitely recommend that, and also just like sitting around the fire is nice for other reasons. It's a good place for storytelling, and just a good way to build skills too, like bush skills, which is another essential part of Friluftsliv too, to learn how to survive in the woods, which sounds dramatic, but it's about, you know, it's a bit of a lost art, you know, skills that everybody used to have when we lived in the country, and on the farms. People knew how to make fire and build shelters and all that, and a lot of that has been lost because, you know, we get our food from the convenience or from the supermarket, and we're just, you know, we've become alienated from the natural world, and with that comes a loss of those skills. So Friluftsliv is the perfect way to dip your toes in some of those areas, and you can have a lot of fun doing it. And I'm, you know, and it's lifelong learning. I'm still learning. I just learned how to forage for mushrooms like a few years ago, and I'm 44 now. So there's definitely always room for the new challenges and new learning experiences.
I think it's great with kids also to establish some of that when they're young, because I find, like, for myself, my best memories, and I learned a lot of skills in the forest in Canada, and, you know, where we didn't have running water, or like we weren't connected to the hydro at our summer cottage. And I feel like you know, then you get into your own life and you sort of have a more modernized existence for a while, until we have kids now, and I'm kind of picking up those old skills that I really love this, and I want these same memorable experiences with my kids. So I'm dusting off those old skill sets, and then now learning more myself about foraging and about, you know, building fires with less starting materials. And I think the other thing I wanted to highlight, that it was definitely a takeaway from the book, is that, you know, while there's an invitation to try out new equipment or gear, and, you know, like one that I loved you shared once was the fire starters, the steel fire starters. I don't have it yet, but I would like to. So that's, you know, approaching it with curiosity. It's interesting, but I think you don't need all of that. It's also fine that I just go outside with matches and starting materials to have the experience. So I think that was one thing I wanted to highlight, that, you know, it really is accessible at all different levels, even if it's, I mean, we built a fire on a beach and cooked marshmallows. Like that can be part of
Oh yeah,
the concept.
for sure. Yeah, you just decide what level you want to be at. And it's the same with like clothing. I get so many questions about gear and brands and layering and yeah, of course, like there's a layering system, and that's kind of the gold standard of getting dressed for cold weather. But I was just outside now going for a 45-minute walk during my lunch, and it's pretty cold out here today, and I just had my regular long parka, which I wear to town, or I can also wear it in the woods, and hiking boots and like a warm hat and my regular clothes. So you don't have to like dress in a particular way either, just for this sort of everyday Friluftsliv. It's perfectly fine to get out as long as you're warm and comfortable. And I'm a huge fan of like functional clothes. So you can use, like I use my snow pants or my ski pants. I use them for, just walking around here too on really cold days. So yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, the other thing about it being a lifestyle is the idea that it's not going to change overnight. I mean, I realize I've been living in Denmark for now over 7 years, and the first winter jacket I bought here was one that I thought, well, I want to be able to wear this with the kids, so it needs some durability. I want it to look okay because I'll also be going to the office. So, I made choices for something that was warm and waterproof and durable, and it's just a long black basic coat, but it covers all the needs. And I find it's more been this gradual transition to eliminate any barriers for me.
Right. Oh,
I wonder if my poor connection is now saying wrap it up.
Yeah, you're cutting out a little bit there.
So then quickly before the internet powers that be cut me off, where can people get copies of your book? Where can they learn more about you? And I will be sure to include links when I send this out.
Yes, so the book, you can buy it pretty much anywhere online that sells books. I like bookshop.org because they support small local bookstores. And you can find out more about me and what I do on Facebook and Instagram, and my blog, which is rainorShineMama.com. And Rain or Shine Mama is also my social media handle. So yeah, and like on my social media, you can sort of get a sort of more of a behind the scenes look of my Friluftsliv lifestyle.
Yeah, and I know you have, because the book has just been published in November, it is available everywhere. But if people want to attend other interviews or live discussions, I think you may have other things coming up maybe in the new year they can keep an eye out for.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been lovely to talk about the book, and I know that I'll be going back to it for outdoor recipes myself. So thank you for including those.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, bye-bye. Have a nice day.
You too.